Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's session on career landscape for postdocs during these unprecedented times. More than 70 individuals have signed up to join us for today's program. My name is Dr. Joan Reed. I'm professor of medicine and dean for diversity and community partnership, and lead the Office for Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Partnership at Harvard Medical School. Our office, DICP, mission is to advance diversity and inclusion in health, biomedical, behavioral, and STEM fields in ways that build individual and institutional capacity to achieve excellence, foster innovation, and ensure equity in health locally, nationally, and globally. DICP efforts support the career development of junior faculty, trainees, and students, identify and train leaders in academic medicine and health policy, and provide programs that address crucial pipeline issues. Today's Zoom is part of our Scholars in Translational and Academic Research, as HMS STARS program, that was established by DICP to support the career advancement of postdoctoral fellows, particularly for individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds, while at the same time building a community of diverse individuals within Harvard Medical School. This work is done through enrichment activities such as mentoring, career development, and networking opportunities that enhance the training experience of fellows and provide an environment in which fellows can exchange scientific ideas, where they can, in settings that are informal, and also benefit from sharing their unique perspectives and experience and lessons learned with leaders from across multiple disciplines. Just some quick notes for today's session: that the chat is not going to be available, but if you have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We are recording this session, and at the end there will be a poll. Please stay on long enough. It takes less than a minute, but it will help us in future programming. And now, to start our program, I am so pleased to be able to introduce our moderator for today, Dr. Rosalind Segal, who's professor of neurobiology at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and dean for graduate education at Harvard Medical School. In addition to her research, a major emphasis of her professional life has been devoted toward the education of our next generation of neuroscientists and cancer biologists. And it's with this deep and longstanding commitment and as Dean of Graduate Education that she's responsible for our strategy, oversight, and coordination of Harvard Medical School's PhD and master's degree programs. And her priorities include enhancing the mentoring of our students, focused efforts to expand diversity and inclusion, and increase cohesiveness among our graduate programs. And so with that, I am so pleased to turn this over to Dr. Roz Segal. Dr. Segal?
Thank you very much and for that introduction, and thank you all for joining us on this day. As you all know, this is an unprecedented time. We keep saying that, but it is true. We were originally planning to have this panel discuss ways of enhancing your career and really making oneself poised to go on to careers in academic research and education and exploring different ways of pursuing those goals. As we talked about it, it seemed as if given the timings, what needed to be really redirected somewhat. Many of the postdocs currently are feeling very discouraged because they're not in the labs and worried about the future of their careers. And so I think, as we talked about today, it became clear that we needed to talk about not just the normal proposals for how to advance your career and how to move towards the future, but also think about it in the lens of the current COVID-19 crisis. What we'd like to explore is both how to become poised for going on in a career. What are all the things that you should know as you're thinking about it? And how is this changed by the current pandemic? To address these really important questions, we have a wonderful group of panelists. And it's really a great privilege for me to be able to introduce all of them. The first panelist is Dr. Ino Esieng Ibong, who is a associate professor of chemical engineering, bioengineering, and biology at Northeastern University. Dr. Ibong earned her bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT and her master's in engineering and PhD at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York. She worked at Albert Einstein College of Medicine as a fellow before coming to Northeastern. At Northeastern, she's really been very involved in both research and in teaching. She has recently been awarded the NIH Mentored Research Career Development Award for studying her for initiating her studies on atheroprotective versus atherogenic glycocalyx mechanotransduction mechanisms. And she's really been involved in projects of how to foster those studying STEM education. So she will be one of our panelists, and it's great to be able to welcome her. The second panelist is Dr. Kurian Gibbs. She received a BA from Harvard, PhD from Stanford, and did her postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Washington before coming here to Harvard. Dr. Gibbs is an associate professor in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology at Harvard University, and she is also an associate member of the Broad Institute. She has received a number of honors as she started here. She's a recipient of a David and Lucille Packard Foundation Fellowship for Science and Engineering and the George Merck Fellowship. Again, providing another lens into career paths in academic. So both Dr. Ibong and Dr. Gibbs will provide a view of their paths advancing in academics and in research and education. They will be greatly complemented by the other two panelists. Dr. Jason Huestis is a lecturer in BCMP here at Harvard Medical School, and he is currently the Director of Student Development and Training Evaluation for the program in graduate education at HMS. In that capacity, I work very closely with Jason. Jason is really an invaluable resource here at HMS as he teaches graduate students, develops curriculum for new and exciting courses, and he is critical in our ability to assess graduate student learning and development, as well as working with postdocs on assessing their training. He has been instrumental in developing training opportunities that really allow for professional development for students and enable students to explore how they can move forward in an academic career, how they can move forward in careers in biotech and pharma, in consulting or business, or other areas that our students go on to. This has allowed him to have a great perspective on what is needed in distinct career modalities. Our last speaker and panelist is Dr. Milka Caustic. She's the Program Director of Chemical Biology at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. In this role, Dr. Caustic supports a large and vibrant chemical biology program with approximately 120 scientists. She is involved with the faculty and their research. She's involved in training of postdocs and training of graduate students. Her ability to do this and to participate in training is really enhanced by her previous experiences. Before joining Dana-Farber, she was the editor of Cell Chemical Biology and also editor of Structure, two research journals that are published by Cell Press. She is really a passionate advocate for science, for promoting gender and gender equality in society and science, and career development and well-being of a diverse group of early career researchers. So this is really a fantastic group to be discussing training in education, and in particular, what we need to do today to deal with our current situation. So what I would like to do is start with the panelists by asking each one to talk a little bit about your personal career trajectory and specific lessons that you think current postdocs and other trainees can take from these. So I think we can just go in alphabetical order, starting with Dr. Ibong.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all of the attendees. It's definitely a great time for us to be talking, as Dr. Segal mentioned, considering all that is going on, and I'm honored to be participating in this panel. So she's given you a little bit about my background. From my trajectory, I always like to start out and say, honestly, we have plans and then we have the things that just happen to us. So I think through, for me, undergraduate school, everything always went according to plan, as I would say. As a graduate student, leaving engineering or expanding on my fundamental engineering, my interest was to branch into a new field, and so I changed to biomedical engineering at that time. And so that's when things started to not necessarily go as planned, because I think experiencing it and moving, I always tell my students, follow the data. We have a plan, but we have to follow the data. So I had to sort of follow the data. And initially I went into the PhD merely because I thought I wanted to only teach. And I knew I had to do the dissertation so that I could get the PhD so that I could then teach. What happened to me while I was there actually is that I had a parent who became ill with cancer and died of it. And what was great is that I was in a place where I could then start to think about cures for disease. So the research that I do is focused on cardiovascular disease. And we also look at applications to cancer metastasis. And we now also look at neurodegenerative disease. And my passion for that actually began through interactions, not only within my family, but outside of my family, seeing what affected people. So my timeline extended a little bit as a graduate student. I wanted to make sure that I was doing quality work that would help me to have a productive research career. And from there, especially as an engineer, I believe I took a leap and a risk a little bit by pursuing a postdoctoral opportunity. I was also looking at faculty positions at the time, and I did get an offer for a teaching position, and I decided to move forward instead with a postdoctoral position that had, you know, obviously not as great as the salary, but also no clear end. But it was an excellent opportunity. And at the same time, I was looking for positions at NIH that didn't end up panning out, but I was also applying to medical schools. So I ended up working at Albert Einstein College of Medicine to do my postdoc. It was a unique opportunity because it was joint with the College of Engineering at the City College of New York. I had two mentors from the two institutions, and both are top in their fields, so that was excellent. I was on a training grant. Being at Albert Einstein was excellent because now I wasn't actually just thinking about teaching and research, but to be honest, through panel discussions like this, I started thinking about how I could apply my expertise to policy. I started thinking about applying it to publications. I started thinking about an industry as a possibility. So during the course of my time, I was exploring different ways that I could have an impact on this field. And regardless of which industry I went into, I realized that the core that we focus on would actually be the same, and that is do good research, make sure that I'm developing myself as an educator and serve my community. And so what I felt was unique about my postdoc experience as compared to some of my colleagues who were in the same group is that not only were we going to the lab and writing papers, but actually on the side, I did try to develop myself as a teacher. I got a certificate for teaching. I had undergraduate students come into my lab and work with me, and I had to teach them from scratch what they were doing. And I was also very involved with my professional society as well, you know, reviewing abstracts, chairing sessions, and that actually led to my faculty position. So I was at a point looking, and I want to point out actually one thing I wanted to mention. When I started looking or thinking of looking, it was when we had an economic recession. That was 2008, 2009. I finished my PhD in 2006, so I'd done the postdoc for 3 years and I thought I was done. And you'll note that I actually didn't leave my institution until 2013. So it was good that I started early. And then in the midst of a recession, that I was able to think about ways to sort of expand my postdoc experience, applying for my own grants, doing things like that, that would make me competitive for a faculty position when it became available. So through my professional development activities in my professional society, I was actually asked to apply for the position at Northeastern University. And the rest is history. I would love to say more, but I know that there are other panelists who would also want to talk about their experience as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that the importance of letting data speak to where you go, and also not fixating too strongly on one path, but figuring out where you want to go. I often tell people that if you're on a path that you're not liking, in order to get someplace, you will probably not like where that path goes to. So it's important to like it as you move forward. So Dr. Gibbs?
Thank you for having, hi, thank you for having me here today. It was really wonderful to hear Dr. Ibong's story. I come from a biology background, and so I am still a biologist. I did my undergraduate at Harvard, and when I was in high school, just to give you a little bit of background, I was lucky enough to work in a government research lab for 2 summers. And that really whetted for me my desire to do academic research. And I entered college knowing that I wanted to do academic research. And so in a very stereotypical path, I did undergraduate research here, and then I went directly to graduate school. And it was during graduate school that I started wondering whether or not academia was for me. I was in California, in the Bay Area, during the end of the first .com era on a graduate student salary. So as you can imagine, ends were hard to meet. And it was a challenging time. And so I started looking at other possible avenues. And so some of the things I explored during that time were going into things like consulting or management consulting or other business-like arenas that could use skills that are developed during a scientific PhD. I also looked at doing a postdoctoral fellowship at companies, for example, at Genentech or other Bay Area companies. And in the end, I decided to pursue an academic PhD at the University of Washington, partly because I was very excited about the project and mostly because I was very excited about the mentor. I felt that there was more that I wanted to do, that I wanted to show for myself again, that I could take a project and really take it to a new point. And from there, I applied for faculty positions. I also was looking during the economic crisis, the prior economic crisis in the 2008 to 2010 era. And the reality is that just the ground shifts under us when the economy changes. And I don't know if there are good ways to prepare for it, but I think that Dr. Yvonne, when she said applying for fellowships is really important, applying for grant money is really important, getting your work out there is really important, trying to keep as many options open as possible in the skills that you develop, and taking time to participate in your society programs is also important. And those are things that I've also been able to do over time. I've really also focused on mentoring. I've always enjoyed having undergraduate students work with me, either as a grad student, postdoc, or faculty member, which is, I think, why I still am in the college here. And the transition to being a junior faculty is really different than being a postdoc. In some ways, it's the same in terms of writing. The biggest change, though, is that you also have to manage people and time. You have to manage expectations. And that, I think that there are better programs now to help junior faculty with that transition. But I think that the more that you can develop skills in the end of your postdoc with that kind of management of time, people, and resources, the bigger leg up you'll have once you're in your junior faculty position.
Thank you very much. That's a really good, it's really interesting to hear how people have come to where they're at. And I think it's also really good for this point in time to have two people who were looking for jobs in 2008, another challenging time. So next, Jason, do you want to talk about your career and progression?
Sure. Thank you very much, Rice. So I'll start off by saying the entire summary of what I'll give it over my career is just to say there was two things that were a hallmark. I always had a plan, but the plan never worked out the way I thought the plan would work out. And so the key advice I'd give you at the beginning is it's really good to have a plan, to like write goals down, have a sense of where you're going. But in each of the moments, the circumstances around me were never what I thought they would be. And all I could do was make the best decision I could make at the time as the next step. And I think that was sort of what played out. So to rewind a bit, I actually grew up in the Caribbean. I grew up in Belize. You finish high school at 16. And typically after high school, you do in junior college for about 2 years, sixth form, and then you go into your professional training. So that would have put me at 18 making the decision to do one of the three things that they tell you do if you're in a developing country, which is you be a doctor, you be a lawyer, you be an engineer. And so that's sort of where I was. And I knew I didn't want to do engineering and I didn't want to do law. And medicine actually appealed to me for a lot of reasons. So I thought I was going to do that. But at 18, I really didn't feel like I should be going to be a doctor. And I decided to actually finish college and I came to the US. So I went to St. Louis University where I finished my undergrad. And I was actually, I majored in biology, chemistry, and political science. And it was actually sort of a split from the beginning. I already knew I was interested in a lot of things and I actually just like learning new stuff. And it wasn't until I was an undergrad that I started doing research. So that was effective as a junior. I got into a lab, started doing Drosophila research, early developmental biology, and really liked it. But all the time I was sort of, so I'm a first generation student, all the time I'm sort of like managing, figuring out, like I got to figure out the path because I can't really ask anybody what to do next. So I just got to figure this out in the situation. So I was actually only supposed to be at undergrad for 2 years and a family tragedy ended up having me drop classes the last year. And I convinced my parents, I got this figured out. I know I can work part-time enough to pay for that one class to stay 1 more year as an undergrad, just to finish that class. So I was going to stay for a 3rd year to do that. And actually, I was like already set to do that. And the summer before I started, I got an email from the registrar's office saying, we noticed that you're only registered for one class. Just as a reminder, you can't register for one class and keep your scholarship. And I wrote back, I was like, actually, my scholarship is done. And they're like, actually, if you take a full year of classes, we'll give you a scholarship again. And so I was like, okay, I'll just take a year of classes. So it gave me time to do a little bit more research, and then I graduated. And at that time, so that was about 2004 that I was finishing up. I was looking for opportunities as a finished BS, trying to do some research as a tech. I was working for my advisor. He didn't have funding for me to stay in the lab, but his wife had funding. And I ended up going to work for her for the summer just while I was looking for a job. So I started working at WashU as a technician, and she was just wrapping up her time as a research postdoc and looking to start her own lab in Michigan. And she said, I know this is crazy, but are you willing to move to Michigan and help me set up my lab? And I was like, okay. So I moved to Michigan. And actually, before I left, her husband said, before you commit to my wife, I'm going to drive you to Michigan and make sure you like this and that she's not like luring you to Michigan against your will. So he drove me to Michigan. I checked it out. I moved up there, helped them set up the lab, and then came to grad school. And so I knew I wanted to do, by that point I knew, I'm not ready yet. I'm going to do a master's degree. So I only applied for master's program, got in at Tufts for a master's degree, which was the best option too, because they do funded master's programs at the time. So I did it. I wouldn't have to go into debt, and I could do it. And I was there for, supposed to be for 2.5 years doing this, started doing research on, so I was working on nematodes in between, and then ended up thinking, I really like the medical application. I want to go do something more parasitology. Why don't I go study infectious worms? So I came to grad school to do infectious worms, working on Brugia. And that's what I was doing. And I was going to graduate. And I was going to graduate right around 2008, actually. And I made the decision before any of the collapse started to happen, because my advisor at the time got new funding and she could keep a PhD student. And she said, you have the option. Do you want to stay and do a PhD? And I was like, you know what? I like this. I'm going to finish the PhD. I switched over. And then right after that, things kind of went downhill. I was like, well, it's a good thing I wasn't on the market right now. I'm trying to find a job. So I ended up staying there. But because I had more free time on my hands, I decided to get really involved in extracurricular activities. So I'd already been teaching a fair bit. There's embedded teaching a lot in that program. But what started off as, okay, I'm going to get involved in the Graduate Student Council. So I started to do that, got very involved in campus advocacy, ended up linking up with other graduate student leaders in the Boston area, and we formed the Boston Graduate Leadership Organization, which was really supposed to be about socializing and community service beyond the institution. And then that got me drawn into the National Association for Graduate Professional Students, which does a lot of lobbying. Things like parental leave were big at the time, insurance, that type of coverage. And then at some point around 2010, I told everybody, I'm done now. I got to finish this PhD. Stopped doing everything else. And it took me about 2 years, and I finished in 2012. So there's actually another thing that was going on, which is, I won't explain all the details, but you know, there was a recession in 2008. There was also a bubble in NIH funding that had translated into training a lot of trainees that ended up collapsing. And the start of that collapse of all these people who were coming out in the market was actually right around 2011, 2012. So you had an excess of people who had the degree and the number of opportunities that were available right then. And actually, that same year, the NIH task force report came out because they'd seen the signs that there was this surplus of people. The idea that we know everybody's not becoming a faculty member, we think it's bigger than 10%. We need to look at this and actually figure out how many it was. And that report effectively was the first marker that said of all the people who are finishing a PhD in the life sciences in the country, it's actually about 20% of those people who are becoming tenure track faculty members, and there's 80% of the other. And we need to characterize what that other is, figure out, you know, do people really want to be faculty? Do they want to do this other stuff? And how we support people doing that. So I literally translated my experience. So I was on the market. I wasn't looking for postdocs. I think I'd known at that point for sure. I was really interested in this sort of student advocacy, higher ed admin positions. And this strange opportunity opened up at Harvard, which is a curriculum fellows position, where they were looking for somebody trained as a life scientist who wanted to do stuff that was more in the higher ed admin teaching space. So I came to Harvard, started the position. I applied for a ton of jobs that year. Just started to apply because I realized I was graduating. And then I only got interviewed and got 2 jobs, and both of them were at Harvard. So that's how I ended up at Harvard. And now I'm working here, and I've been here for 8 years through a series of progressions. And I think I've just sort of refined what it is that I like to do, how to do that. And one big thing I've learned about myself is that it's really important to sort of know what your values are and sort of what things you're willing to give up on and what things you want to hold on to. And one of the big things that I like doing is solving problems in general, but it's not so much just the solving problems. I also work very well in spaces where people don't know what the problem is. And I get to figure out what that problem is and then try to come up with a way to solve that. So that's sort of like my strategy for approaching things. And I've realized that if I use that framework for looking for what I'm doing, there's a lot of different things you can do. That's just sort of the way I go about deciding what it is that I want to do next. So I'm a Harvard Noah Director for Student Development and Training Evaluation, and we can answer more questions about that later.
Thank you, Jason. That was great. I've been working with you for a year and I didn't actually know your whole career trajectory, so it was really interesting to hear. And you know, some of the things that I hear across all of these are about the importance of sort of societies and organizations and joining those and becoming part of a larger group. And also that bad times happen a lot. And so you have to be flexible and able to adapt. And finally, how important it is to figure out what you like and then be flexible about everything else while you focus on what you want to do and what's most important. So our last panelist is Milka Caustic, who will also tell us about her career path. And it's really fascinating to hear all these differences.
Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's staying safe and healthy. I suppose my career path can be cast as and now for something completely different, I guess. So I did my undergraduate and master's studies at a European developing country. Originally, it was Yugoslavia, and I did my undergrad and master during the Civil War in the 90s. So that means that I was applying for graduate schools in the United States while NATO was conducting a bombing on Serbia. So I defended my master's in a very tumultuous time. Speaking of, is there ever a dull moment in the history of mankind? And then I came to Brandeis to do my PhD in chemistry. Now, unlike some of the other panelists that were thinking about different options and figuring things out, I basically knew from the age of about 13 that chemistry is the science for me. And I stayed chemist through and throughout my undergraduate and my master's and my PhD. Then I took a slight shift into molecular biology for my postdoc. And the main reasons why I decided to do a postdoc were basically because of a turnover of graduate students. I became a senior graduate student when I was in my second year of grad school. And there were a couple of different factors that played into it, but it's mostly because I came into the PhD with a full master's degree already, had a lot of research experience, and was able to get up and running with research very quickly compared to some of my peers. But the lab was small, and it didn't have any postdocs. So I was challenged scientifically, but not challenged, in my view, enough. And that drove me to do a postdoc, and I was looking only at the institutions that have primarily postdocs and not too many grad students, such as Harvard Medical School, NIH, and the Scripps Research Institute. At that time, it was only in California. And I spent 3 lovely years in San Diego area. doing research that I really enjoyed a lot. And I published my first project after 2 years. I started on an ambitious new project, and everything was kind of starting to indicate that I'm heading down a very transitional path towards having my own lab. However, what happened in the third year of my postdoc is that I started to have a series of self-reflections. And I took a step back to really ask myself, where do I see myself in 5-10 year time? What are the types of things that I enjoy, that I value, and that I'm good at? And through those series of self-reflections, I sometimes refer to those as making a list of likes and dislikes. What emerged is that I actually stopped liking the doing of research. And at that time, and this is now 15 years ago, I was in one of the top labs for the type of research I was doing. And we had several NIH grants in a row rejected. And I was involved in putting those together, so I knew what was going on. And that was very off-putting to me, because I thought that there was no way for me to compete if one of the top labs in the country is having such a hard time getting funding. And funding situation, I appreciate, has only gotten more complicated, complex, and challenging. So all those things played a role in my decision to start thinking, other than research and science, what are other things, what are other skills that I have? And as all panelists mentioned, one of the best ways to test your assumptions about what it is that you like, what it is that you don't like, what types of things are you good at, and what types of things are really not your cup of tea, is to get involved in a society or organization. For me, that was the Association for Women in Science, the San Diego chapter. And being active, so you can't just join, you have to become really active to get the best benefit of being involved in some of these things. Some of the things that emerged from that was that I actually liked to organize events, that I like to organize outreach activities, that I like to be involved in communicating science to lay public, that I was actually quite good at taking complex scientific ideas and translating them into something more digestible. So all this suggested to me that I may enjoy a career that involves some level of scientific appreciation, understanding, big picture views, and communication. And serendipitously, the position at Cell Press opened up that I applied for, and I got the role of the editor of 2 journals. It was always a shared editorial responsibilities between a structural biology journal and a chemical biology journal. And I spent about a little bit more than a decade being the editor. And in the last year of being the editor, I started being restless because I felt that I wasn't growing or learning as rapidly as I like to do. And on top of it, Cell Press is part of Elsevier, and for-profit publishing company. And I started to undergo a bit of a shift in my priorities at that time, and decided that I should look for opportunities in the nonprofit area. And that brought me to Dana-Farber. Actually, I wasn't actively looking for this role, but I was visiting chemical biologists at Dana-Farber as a part of my editorial responsibilities. And by chance, as I was passing through the lunchroom area, I noticed the printout, the job posting for my current role on a fridge. And that just caught my eye. The same day, we kind of established contact, and I got to my current role. So I guess one thing you can take away from what you just heard is that you should have plan, as Jason said, but also sometimes serendipity will help you along as well.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. It's really been great to hear about your journeys. There are a number of questions from the participants that really focus on the current crisis. And in some ways, all of you have spoken about how you were looking for jobs at a time where there was a crisis as well, and a feeling of competitiveness. So the questions that people are asking about is what you do, how you saw the job possibilities changing, and what there was that you could do to really adapt for that when you were looking for jobs, and whether you think those are the strategies that are helpful now, or whether we need to pursue new ones. So look, I hope everyone can answer that sort of very briefly so that everyone can get heard. So let's go in reverse order. So Milka first.
Thank you. I would say that some of the best ways to prepare yourself is to take an opportunity while you're doing your grad studies or postdoc or wherever you are, and get out there, meet people, hear from many different sources what are the careers they're doing, what are the conditions, what are the hiring managers looking for, and get people to know you, because a lot of hiring happens through word of mouth and connections and networking.
Thanks. And Jason, what would you say about positioning yourself now and what things you especially need to do right now?
And sorry, and do you mean that in the context? Sorry, you were muted, Roz.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, you mean that in general or in the context of the current environment?
I think particularly people are asking a lot of questions about the current environment. So I think talking more about the current environment and how that makes it more difficult, frankly. I know you were involved in looking at those surveys of what's available. So this is a great question for you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so obviously we're seeing a contraction in the number of open positions, and I think that academia will be particularly challenging next year for people who are thinking about going this year actually and next year, for people who are thinking about looking for faculty positions, only because so many schools are thinking about trying to rein in costs and not making that commitment when you think about things like startup packages, all that for faculty. So the two pieces of advice, to keep it short, that I would say right now is one thing that I've been noticing in the background as postings have started to go up for the coming year or two is that I'm seeing more of these visiting assistant professor type positions where it's like at least a 2-year commitment. So that's actually should be appealing for people, especially if you're going to run out of funding and you're thinking about, I need to move because I saw that question in the box that my situation is changing. You obviously, in general, always want to be careful about those positions and how much you'll be tasked with doing. But if it actually is something that could help you build momentum towards a better application in 2 years or a year, that's a good potential thing to be looking. So don't limit yourself only to assistant professor type positions. The other thing I'd say is I don't know necessarily how the market for industry positions are going to be affected, but at this point, you have to make the best decision again in the moment. And there's two parts to that, which is broaden your scope and think about some of the other things that you could be doing. I don't necessarily think that the next step, if you take that, means you can't come back and pursue an academic career if that's really what you want. The landscape's changed, and I think that anybody who's interviewing you in 2 years and doesn't realize that you made a decision in the current economic climate is actually somebody who wasn't paying attention to the world.
Dr. Gibbs?
I second Jason's comment about looking at if you are at a point in your career where you are ready to apply for other positions. Of course, you should apply for the academic position. And you want to go into academia. Of course, you should apply for the academic positions that are available this fall. However, there are more and more people who are making the move from being in industry for a couple of years and moving back to academia as junior faculty. It's not super common, but it's more common than it was, 10, 15 years ago. And I think that fluidity will continue because many of the skills that you have in industry pertain to academia and vice versa. But my specific advice is the same advice I give normally, which is that I am a big advocate of having a 1, 3, 5, 10-year plan. And this is not set in stone. This is not, my life will definitely be this in 10 years. But I think it's worth taking the time to think about what would you aspire to have to hopefully achieve in 10 years? Because that can sometimes help guide when you have the decisions in front of you or the choices in front of you, it can guide which path will keep options open later. Regarding crises, there's no good advice other than take care of yourself mentally and physically. If you are not in a good mental and physical place, you cannot put your best foot forward. I think it's really important to always have your CV ready to go. So if you haven't had a chance to dust off your CV, even if you're not applying this year, dust off your CV and still go out and meet people via Zoom. A lot of the interviews that will happen in the next year and a half will start off with Zoom interviews. They were already moving that way anyway. So become very comfortable with your Zoom. I know I still struggle sometimes with mine. Be very comfortable giving a 15, 20-minute talk online. And also be set up to be able to handle questions that come in from many different people who you're not in the same room with, but who you're interacting with over the internet.
Thank you. And Eno?
Yeah, so I'm going to give my first impression answer and then some answers that are going to piggyback on the other panelists. So the first thing I thought of was, around that 2008 to 2010 period when I thought I should be wrapping up. And I mentioned earlier that I started working on fellowships and grant applications. I'm going to reiterate it here because at that time, I wasn't sure if they were going to be funded. Sometimes they were mine. Sometimes they were from my PI and my name was not on it. And what turned out working out for me was when my PI's grant got funded that I wrote. It worked out in 2 ways. It was 5 years of funding for me. And number 2, I got the experience that when the job opened up, they knew I had experience writing grants. So, while funding might be tight right now, I would really highly suggest that you take this advice seriously and try to do that yourself. I want to also talk about opening yourself up to options. So, Jason mentioned the visiting position, but there's so many others. So I've had this conversation in my lab meetings with my students. We are all incredibly lucky, those of us on this call, because the field we are in is essential right now during this crisis. So you might be looking for a position that's not considered essential, but there's a position that's essential that's adjacent to what you've been being trained for. So you just need to open yourself up and apply for many different opportunities. You never know where they would take you. And yes, as Dr. Gibbs said, you can always come back to academia. And you would come back with a unique niche. I want to talk also about the 1, 3, and 10-year plan. So one thing I always think about with these plans is, how can I still execute on my plan regardless of where I am? So this is why it's important to have a plan. If you don't get to go to the tenure track assistant professor position, I remember when I was looking at industry thinking, okay, I know I want to do a certain type of research, so which industry allows me to have a significant impact in that field? I know I want to be teaching and mentoring. Am I going to be in a place where, for example, I can have interns come in, or I can be training clients? If you can think about the different aspects of things that you feel will make you feel satisfied with your career, I bet you can figure to satisfy those requirements and still move ahead no matter where you are. And the last piece I want to talk to you about is the importance of talking to people on Zoom, as was also suggested. So I did a lot of informational interviews over a couple of year time span. What was really fun was one interview where I had spoken to someone who says, oh, I just got a note today that we're going to be laying people off tomorrow. So I got to learn about the job, but I also got to learn about some harsh decisions that were being made. Okay, fast forward, we are professionally two people who are still in close contact. Both of us work in different places, but we still do interact with each other. So I think that those interviews are going to help you immediately. If there are opportunities, they may translate to job offers, but if there are not immediate opportunities down the line in your career, those interviews will pay off. So those are informal, informational interviews, and you should definitely pursue them. People are really happy to talk to you one-on-one about their career trajectory and answer any questions you have.
Great. Thank you all. As I'm looking at the Q&A, people really are very anxious right now about the current situation and how to move forward. One of the questions that I'm just going to answer briefly is there was a question about what happens if you're a postdoc and your lab is experiencing decreased funding and is going to let you go. That's a very difficult situation. I think that some of the ideas you've been hearing about questions of can you as a postdoc identify funding opportunities that will allow you to stay, that's worth looking at. It may not be feasible, and it may not be feasible in the right timetable. A second is to talk to collaborators of your PI. Are there people who are working on the project and may be able to take you on at this time? Third is to say, okay, right now, the postdoc, I can't pursue a postdoc. You could look at some of those 2-year faculty positions that Jason mentioned. You could start thinking about alternatives, whether it is in industry. And I've been hearing a lot from people in industry about that they still are currently hiring because the country is recognizing how critical it is to have people doing science and coming up with new ways of dealing with and treating disease. So I think there are a lot of opportunities. It's very easy. It's important to have a plan, and it's very easy though to feel oneself hemmed in by the plan rather than enabled by the plan. So think of the plan as not just saying what you need to do, but what you're planning to do as a way of highlighting what's most important in your planning. So other questions that had come up regard, again, flexibility. Some people are talking about whether as a scientist, thinking about moving more clinical, in fact, whether it's worth becoming a physician scientist so that you can really be involved in clinical research, which and the need for that has been really highlighted by the current pandemic. And obviously that is a possibility. It does get harder to do over time. And there are a lot of ways as a researcher without an MD where you can certainly pursue the clinical implications. So other questions that I would like the panelists to also talk about is if you're continuing as a postdoc, you still have your position, but you're looking towards the future and saying, what do I need to do right now besides my work, my research, to best position myself for the future? Some of the things I've heard highlighted are being involved in your societies, getting some training in teaching and grant writing. Other things that you would suggest, and anyone can take that question.
I'll jump in first with one of the things. I think that to go into academic research is a balance, and when you pull together everything that's needed, not all family situations allow everyone to do everything. And so it's not, I want to clarify, I'm not saying to go to one of each of these and it checks off the box. You have to figure out what's interesting to you. And I'm simply saying that on top of doing really high quality research and committing to the research that you're doing, to expand your skill set into other ways. And so one thing, for example, that postdocs in my group have done is that they often co-review papers with me. And when I submit the paper, I disclose that this is the postdoc's name, and they help to write to do the review. And that gives them the experience of one, looking through other people's work, but then two, it really allows us to have a nice dynamic about what are reasonable expectations for a reviewer, and how can we, what could we learn to improve our papers from this other person's papers, but also then how can we help our colleagues improve their papers with any holes they might have seen or things like that. So I'd really encourage reaching out and working with your PI on those kind of reviews. The last thing is that as a graduate student, as a postdoctoral fellow, I really enjoyed mentoring undergraduates. And that's another thing that can really help your own research move forward, but it does take time. If you want to go into academic research, I think it's really powerful to be able to do that.
Other input on what other things are important to be doing right now as a postdoc?
I can add a couple of comments on this one. The other thing I would add that I think people underestimate is actually the amount of work and effort it takes to put together faculty position applications and the number of things that institutions ask for. And so actually there's a series, and I can find a way to relate the dates to people afterwards, that I'm offering this summer, which actually is really called the Academic Job Packet. And the whole goal is to get people to understand this is what a job posting looks like, and these are the 75 things they're going to ask you to submit. And so there's a lot of philosophies, for example, that right now while you're away from the lab and you're kind of in a forced reflective situation, that you might actually want to start thinking about harnessing information for. And that includes things like your research statement, but also your teaching statement, your diversity statement. I've seen institutions ask for multiple different things, like trying to figure out how you're going to get your transcripts. I've seen one school ask for all of your school transcripts. So figuring out the logistics of some of those things is a good time to organize that. And the other thing I'd say is it'll be interesting to see if, because of the market on the fall, what teaching will look like and whether there'll be more adjunct positions actually, because schools are not filling what they expected to be tenure track faculty positions. So it might be a time to get an adjunct experience that might have also is also challenging to get in the Boston area, particularly where you would be teaching online, and that's a good skill set to have, as many schools are moving to online teaching in general, or mixed blended teaching as well.
Yeah. Other input on what things are important to be doing right now to prepare yourself for future job search?
Yeah, so what I would add is kind of builds on these two types of comments. As an editor, I would say, and now in my role on advising people on papers and grants, it's good to invest a lot of efforts to learn how to communicate your ideas in your science in a written format, as well as orally. So those are the two skill sets that are related but not equal, but they take a lot of practice and a lot of commitment. And while you're staying away from the research, perhaps now it's the time to start really kind of putting in effort and investing some time into learning how to speak well, how to explain well in both written and oral format.
Yeah. Okay. So another question that trainees often have is, how do you know if you really will be able to go on in a career in academics? What tells you that you can? We all have self-doubts. I think imposter syndrome is intrinsic to science, because you are always an imposter because you're doing something that no one has ever done before, and you don't know if it will work every single time you do an experiment. So in some ways you have to be able to deal with that doubt. But so I guess my question is, how do you know that you should go on in a career in academics, or a career, how do you know you should go on in a career in another area, whether biotech or pharma or editing?
So I'll start with that. I just knew by applying and going to interviews, to be honest. I think you can't really tell until you visit in a place. And you know, I did start having doubts because of, you know, economic downturn and, you know, the struggle with funding. And I did at a point feel like I did not want to into academia anymore. But whenever I went to interview in industry or for other opportunities at all, and yet, you know, where I was academically at a point didn't feel right either. But I'll tell you, with regards to academics, I think it's important to realize that options are different and expectations are different. So, you know, I was an engineer at a med school and I learned a lot technically, but at that time, you know, the culture was different than what was a good fit for me, right? And I really like to teach, and we didn't teach as much, right? So, you know, I like thinking about, you know, education at the med school, because there's no undergraduate in a way that they're doing. And ended up in a place where we do balance between, you know, graduate education and research and undergraduate education. And still, if you just want to teach, there are undergraduate. So academic institutions are all different. And then if you look at the research end, you know, you can do research at a place that is all the way from undergrad all the way up through the postdoc, or you can be at a research institute that's within a medical school, or you can be doing research in industry. So I really, to be honest, and got this and went on the interviews. And I think it's totally fine to do things that way. In fact, you know, I mentioned earlier the information review. I think that view is even better in terms of, you know, trying to get information and figure out what's a good fit. I don't think that if you don't go out, you will be able to figure out, at least for me, I would not be able to figure out what's a good fit and what's not a good fit.
Others? Who else has comments on figuring out what's a good fit and dealing with that question of, can I even do this?
Okay. So I have two parts to the answer to that. So the first thing is, general, should I be pursuing the academic track? I think going back to the comment earlier, my comment about values, I think that's actually something you do need to assess at some point and incorporate that into your decision making. And I think that you should use some of the tools that already have that naturally embedded in it. So for example, the My IDP site, the My Individual Development Plan site, actually starts off with a number of the standard values assessments that you should be doing, which kind of get you to think about what are my strengths and my weaknesses, what do I like, what do I dislike, and how does that translate into what my range of options should be. There's like 31 things I could do, but maybe only 7 of them fit what I want. And maybe being a faculty member is or is not part of that 7, right? So that's the first step. The other 3 things that I can offer as potential resources. So for one, there was actually a survey of faculty people who are on the faculty job market that began last year and has started to translate into publications. So I'm actually going to put a link into the box, which is one of those papers, which is in bioRxiv right now, which is called Insights from a Survey-Based Analysis of People Who Are on the Faculty Job Market. And it kind of gives you a lot of the answers to the questions like what things mattered, what things didn't. Was it publication number? Was it CNS publications? Is it the fact that I had funding? So that's one part of that. The second thing that I'll put in the box is that there's actually a tool that was developed at the University of California, San Francisco, called ACRA, which is the Academic Career Readiness Assessment Tool. And it was actually based by interviewing 17 faculty in different types of educational institutions where they've served in hiring capacities for new faculty members. And it's designed to give you a sense of if I'm aiming for a community college or I'm aiming for a bigger one, which things will matter more or less. And there's also one other publication, which is a bit broader, which I'll also put in the box, which is a survey of the skill set gaps and satisfaction of people in multiple different career trajectories who finished STEM PhDs. And so what it did was survey about 5,000 people who were in the market and said, when I made this transition, what things did I struggle with? And what things do I like most about the job? And I think those 3 components together are going to give you a good sense of whether this might be for you. So I'll put those in the box.
That's great. Thank you. Other additions to that question, Kurian, Milka? Okay. Thank you, Jason. He's just added some of those. So other questions that are coming up are regarding the transition from graduate student to postdoc. And as you're transitioning, what things to be thinking about so that you're positioning yourself for the career that you want. Another question is about preparing CVs, and I'll come to that afterwards. And a similar question is whether they're specific, whether reflecting back on your trajectory and your cohort, are there specific things that you think looking across the group really are critical for success?
I have an initial response to that, which is repeating things that have been said before, but really knowing what your own personal skill sets are and what your personal goals are. And everyone has different goals, right? And at the end of the day, we have to be able to be happy with the lives that we build for ourselves. And that can be achieved in many different ways. And I think that the cohorts, my peers from graduate school and postdoc, who have chosen to do things that are really important for their personal choices and personal life, tend to be happier now than those that put that at the bottom and said, I'll just wait for that to happen later. And I think that this COVID-19 crisis pandemic has reminded us that we don't know what tomorrow will be. And I think that for myself, I had not thought of a new normal being this different, but we are now, at least for the next several months, entered into a completely different world of interactions. And we have to spend a lot of time with the people we choose to live with. And, you know, I think that I think that it's worth reminding ourselves that personal choices are okay and that that's valued and that that's important. And I think that we don't say that to our trainees enough.
Another question that was asked was about, particularly again in COVID-19, a number of people have been doing online courses and developing their skills, particularly in data analysis and in computing. Can that be listed in a CV, and how do you make that feel worthwhile when you're applying for a job? Are there particular ways of including that? And Jason, I actually think you may be the best one to answer that, but everyone else should chime in if they want to.
Okay, so I'm answering that assuming that the person is applying for a faculty position and then also not applying for a faculty position. So I think with the faculty position, it will show up through your publications. I think you can have a skill set thing. It's kind of weird in a CV where the publications and actually the research statement can actually tell you that. So I think you can make it very clear how your approach is incorporate computational skills under the relevant research section. On a resume, for if you're trying to say pivot into something like data science, I think having a very clear skills section that says what your computational quant skills training is and where you've applied it is very common. So I think you can incorporate that both in either capacity.
I want to answer that as well. So while I was doing my postdoc, I actually did 2 certificate programs. One was on teaching and pedagogy, and the other was on the biotech industry. As I mentioned, I was thinking about going into industry. So it was a course where we learned about the science and the business around biotech. And so what I was advised, first of all, it's good to go to workshops and it's good to go to your career center, because I went to them and they advised me, which I did and worked very well, to create a section after my education section. So where you list, your bachelor's through your PhD and postdoc, there's a section where I listed other training opportunities or other training activities. And then I list those certificates there. So yes, it's great actually if you publish related to it and it shows up again. It's great if it shows up again in your research and your teaching statement, just like when you write a grant, you want everything to be cohesive. But you can also spell it out there as part of your educational experiences.
And just to add very briefly, this type of circumstance is really ideal example to give in any sort of HR-driven interview that you're going to be part of. When somebody tasks you to give them an example of a situation where you took a challenge under difficult circumstances, or when you excelled at something that was difficult for everybody to deal with, or something like that. Basically, what you have here is an opportunity to turn your lemons into lemonade and show everybody, while we were struggling through COVID, I took steps to continue to better myself, to learn, to grow. And this can be used as an example in a cover letter or during the interviews or whenever you need to. Although it may not become a very strong point on your CV or resume, it's still something that you can use strategically.
So one question that has come up and actually was directed at Eno, but the others may also want to chime in on this, particularly Jason as well, was many of us as we develop our careers think at various points about going to medical school, and that question of should I be in a PhD, should I be in an MD? And so the question for was what made you decide not to go to medical school?
Well, so let me tell you that, remind you that I'm an engineer. And I say that because when I was working in a med school, I kept thinking, I need to go to med school, but that was because I was in that environment. So I'm not surprised that question comes up on this particular call. But being an engineer is an extremely valuable career to have. And while I was sitting there in that med school thinking I need to go to med school, I remembered I was an engineer, and that's when a lot of different opportunities opened up to me. So actually now when I am in engineering environments, I bring in a very unique perspective as someone who spent a lot of time in a medical school. I collaborate with people in medical schools where my colleagues cannot. I collaborate and have funding from pharmaceutical companies where my colleagues cannot. So after having done the engineering, which was really grueling at MIT, and when I started thinking about going to medical school, thankfully the light came on, and I remembered, you know what, you've already been through school, you've already done this postdoc, you already have something to offer to the field, and this is not the time to start over and go to medical school. And in fact, I was really more interested in physics and math, so initially I wasn't even thinking I would become a biomedical engineer. So remember, my first degree was in mechanical engineering. And I actually, as a high school student, spent some time at a medical lab working, and I really didn't want to do anything related to biology or medicine. So anyway, I hope that answers the question in sort of a long roundabout way, and I thank you for the question.
Yeah, and to add my response on that. So when I was growing up, like I said, I wanted to do that, but there was I was thinking in the context of where I lived, right? And there was a very big need. Part of that was the need for specialists in anything, actually. You're talking about a country that occasionally has like one specialist in anything or none. So there was the need, but also what they were doing, I didn't realize was sort of a mix of what is both medicine and public health. And so I was very interested in the parts of their job too that was sort of building the infrastructure for a better capacity. And I know now that that's like a separate thing in a lot of places, right? You don't get to do those two things because you're sometimes too busy being just a doctor all the time, right? So that was part of the issue there for me. And then I think there's also other things. I knew that if I went to med school, I'd go back to the Caribbean. Being a non-citizen is very difficult to go to med school in the US. So that was always sort of something that was a balance as well. But I think that I ended up, like I said, it was always about problem solving for me. And I ended up finding ways to do that. So I never felt like I gave up on that. I do that all the time.
If you don't mind, I want to add to the answer too. So I think there's also the case of many of us who are, maybe the first in our family. I had in my family PhDs, but not necessarily MD PhDs. So if I had known and if I wanted to do medical school, I think the MD PhD would have actually been a valuable degree. And because I know this is being recorded, I want to make sure that I say that you should consider that, because if my students ever see this, they will wonder why I always tell them that. I actually do advise students quite often to consider the MD PhD, because I think it's great to be able to do research, but also be very close to the clinic and to the patients, so that what we're developing and what we're discovering can actually be applied in a way that's going to be very useful clinically.
Thank you. That's really good. And as an MD PhD myself, I appreciate that, because it does provide a specific set of skills, though it does take a long time for the training. So just to emphasize that as well. And that there are a number of ways in which you can contribute to advancement of clinical practice, as you all have, without an MD. And so I don't think it's a necessary for sure. There was an interesting question, which I'm going to expand on. The question was whether you should have a personal website that represents who you are for the job market. And I'm going to expand that to talk more about social media. I talked to several people about science Twitter and whether they're on science Twitter. I myself have actually found grants that I've applied for on science Twitter. So it's a very useful thing, as well as it being a way, particularly for trainees and early career investigators, to really get known. So I just wonder what everyone would say about social media in general as you're thinking about your career.
maybe I can take that on to begin with. So I'm a big social media person. And if that's who you are, if that feels the right thing for you to do, then the important decision you need to make, in my opinion, is what do you want your social media persona or presence to be? In my case, I keep my Twitter presence pretty much professional. I decided this early on that this is the place where I share my scientific and science-related views, as well as views on scientific publishing, scientific policy, and things like that. But it's I keep Twitter professional and I don't mix it with personal. In terms of having the personal website, I advise people to work on their LinkedIn profiles. And I actually feel that those are important, and they're becoming even more important. They're becoming more important for academic job searches as well. And it's basically a place for you to develop your own personal identity that's separate from your mentor's professional identity. And that's why I feel things like that become important, because very often we view people through the lens of their mentors, where they need to establish themselves as their own, in their own rights.
Thank you. Other thoughts on social media, how that plays into advancing your career?
I will add, so one of the participants mentioned that they're doing data analyst classes right now. So one thing that I'm doing as part of this period of change is to start to think about having a social media presence and what it should look like. It's not something that I've used apart from LinkedIn, but I like to go to a lot of conferences, as I mentioned. I like to network, and now I can't do that. So I think that right now, more than ever, social media and doing it right is really important, just for us to be able to get our work out there and for people to know what we're doing. And I like learning that you can get grants on social media. And I'm looking forward to it. So I wanted to give input from someone who doesn't do it, so that you know that it to me it's a great idea.
I want to follow up, and I'm on social media, though I don't use it aggressively, and I just want to say that. So I'm fundamentally an introvert, and I think that social media makes it very hard for people who are not necessarily the most extroverted personality, especially people who are women or people of non-majority groups. And so I would suggest that, if I like what Milka said, that if it's your thing, but it's okay if it's not your thing. There are other ways to connect with your community, with the community of scientists. And so one thing that if people are not aware of, there are a lot of conferences that are going on right now that are online. And you can find out that information by going on Twitter without a Twitter account. You can find out that information by looking at websites and things like that. And so I think this is a really good time that even if you don't have a social media presence, you still can connect with your colleagues. You can still go to these conferences and ask questions of people who are in France or Singapore, et cetera. And it's worth taking half an hour each day to see what opportunities are out there. If you do start a social media account, I agree that keeping professional and personal apart is really important. I'd also like to point out that when something's online, it's really hard to keep them apart. And so if you're thinking about going into a public role, be really careful about what you're willing to say in social media.
Any other comments about that?
I think everybody covered stuff that I would add. I would echo that sentiment, and the same thing I was going to say, which is the introvert thing. I'm a natural introvert. So that was actually really difficult for me, sort of figuring out how to use social media effectively. Although I think I kind of had to do it because my role evolved and the web was the best place to do it. And so I just had to adapt, and I got used to it. So I kind of get a sense, very strong proponent of the separation, obviously, of personal and professional. I have, in fact, I think I have 2 Twitter accounts actually, one professional one and one personal one, with different things that I put on them. But I haven't used the personal one in a while. But that's sort of, yeah, I think you just have to manage it well. But I do agree, I do conferences a fair bit, and I'm effective in those spaces. I know that they're going virtual. That is the format that we have to use. So having the social media presence is just sort of happens. I don't have a personal website, but I use LinkedIn as that.
So it's now getting to the end of the time. So I think I just want to summarize for a few minutes, for a moment, and then make sure that anyone who is hopping off of this takes the poll before you sign off. As Jason knows, it's really important for us to get surveys. So one of the a few of the important things that I think came up today is that it is a challenging time, but there have been and will continue to be a lot of challenging times in science. And the important thing is to figure out what you really care about in terms of your professional career, and figure out and then identify those and take the paths that work to make it possible for you to do those things. Being flexible is really important, and that things that are useful to do are reaching out and networking and figuring out ways to effectively engage with others. This allows you both to explore opportunities as well as to have people who will support you. And I know the other thing I would say is there are challenging times. This is one of them. That doesn't mean it's impossible to pursue the career that you want. And the silver lining of this current pandemic is that I think the nation as a whole is realizing that they depend on scientists for understanding disease, for understanding the world around us, and for trying to distill truth from fiction. So thank you all. Thank you to all the panelists for being involved today. Thank you to Joan Reed and the office for organizing this panel. And please do fill out the poll that is on your screen now so that we can see what would be useful from here. And I'd also remind everyone that this was recorded, and also that Jason has made available some of the resources that he mentioned during his discussion of academic jobs. So thank you all, and stay safe, stay connected, and stay committed to what you want to do. Thank you all.